So I was going to be done with that. And it just so happened that I came across people who, like Ben Castle and others that have followed since then. First it was Weller on my second solo album. Then it was Ben Castle on my first solo album. And then on my live album, which was basically a way of, for me at the time, of saying, okay, that's what I did, and we're moving forward. These were people who were also appreciative of my work that I had done at the time. Jazz pianist Mark Edwards and the co-producer and my manager at the time, Colin Walker, who all helped me to move forward in that they could see where it is that I wanted to go. And I then decided that I was just going to stop and just do what it is I wanted to do. I did another album, another recorded album that kind of Soul Providence, which followed the Grace and Favors live album. That kind of followed what it was I had done before. Again, a thing to do to say, okay, to the audiences that prefer that kind of thing. I get it. That's what you like. I'll do that, but let me have a couple of, stories in there to tell as well. Did a bit of that and a bit of what they wanted to hear. As I think it was Cannonball Adderley said once, or is reputed to have said, he gives the audience 50% of what they want to hear and 50% of what he thinks they should hear. Tried that as well. And that all works, but for the time that it was, that all worked for that time. But the artist in me was growing still, as Uncle James would say, you what we call a late bloomer. So all of those things came to me late and wanted to do these things much later in life, wanting to do these things that didn't actually sit with the industry way of doing these things. And you didn't have people in my category doing this kind of work. I didn't have a track record for it, so it made it much harder to get into. But I was, as time went on, in the midst of that, I worked at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in Soho. I got that job because I did a performance in celebration of Sir John Dankworth's getting his knighthood, and Dame Cleo Lane getting her ladyship. This was at the stables, and there were a series of performances that were in honor of them doing this. This was just one of them, and I was one of the performers that was headlining that particular one, and I got to perform with Sir John Dankworth and his orchestra at the stables at that time. Cleo Lane for me is like ultimate. She's the only singer who has been nominated for a pop Grammy, a classical Grammy, and a jazz Grammy. Do you know how incredibly splendid you have to be nominated in all three of those categories? I mean, she's just absolutely amazing. And she was going to be introducing me here to sing with her husband's band. And I mean, just to be in their presence, I just was the whole kind of, I'm not worthy. I couldn't even come around them. I was afraid to go into the green room and everything. I was just, and then finally different people were saying, you know, she's going to introduce you. You need to go at least say hi before then, because it's going to look like you're being standoffish. I was like, what do I say to a legend? Eventually I got up enough nerve to go in, and she broke the ice. Really, she saw me, she says, ooh, don't you look snazzy? And that broke the ice. You know, I felt welcomed, and And then I just couldn't stop. And so forth. And obviously she's used to people being that way with her. And she was very warm, very welcoming. And when she introduced me, it was very warm and welcoming. And from that, there was a promoter in the audience from Ronnie Scott's who saw how she introduced me and how warm she was with me. And that resulted in me doing nearly 10 years at the Ronnie Scott's, headlining there, where my shows sold out each time. 5 shows would sell out well in advance for nearly 10 years. And I got to do whatever I wanted to for those 10 years. And that was a great training ground for me for the theatrical aspect of it, because Ronnie's has this connection to the theater world. One, they're in Soho, and the club itself is kind of set up like that. But also the owner, Sally Green, is also part owner of the Old Vic Theater in London. So there were those connections with it. And I was just allowed to experiment. So no one said to me at that time, no one said to me, you have to do your old material, you have to do dance things. I could do whatever I wanted to. So sometimes my shows were jazz standards, all jazz standards. Sometimes they were all my new music that no one had ever heard, and I had only practiced it with the house band that was James Pearson, Sam Burgess. At the time, it was Chris Dagley, who was the drummer who we sadly lost in a motor accident in 2010. And Al Cherry on guitar, and various other, sometimes Lawrence Cottle on bass. But these extremely superb musicians playing whatever I put in front of them, like an hour before the gig. It would just bring the music and this is this, and they go, okay, da 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 da. There you were. And I was used to like practicing with bands at that time. I was used to practicing with bands a couple of weeks before you do a gig. And this was like, if you had an hour before the show, that was as much as you got. But pros, these guys. So this was just a whole new world to where I could experiment, I could tell the stories, and I had room to tell the stories. It wasn't bent on this kind of thing where it has to be like the tune is, or it wasn't like I even had to do my hits. I didn't have to. Sometimes I put them in, sometimes I didn't at all. Sometimes I did totally new songs that no one had ever heard. And the audience always received them well. The shows were always sold out. The tickets kept getting pricier, and people were still filling it out. And that was a wonderful training ground. And it set me, it made the platform for me to be able to go into the theater aspect that I'm in now, which led to me getting an Arts Council Research and Development grant in PRS, Performance Rights Society, Women Make Music grant to do my Cage Street Memorial album, which is a book and a theater production and an album. This originally, Cage Street Memorial, was on my Alberta's Granddaughter album that I had done earlier this century. And that sounded like a long time ago saying this century, but it was earlier this century. And Cage Street Memorial was a tune that was on there, but that was when I was initially trying to do this theatrical production thing, and people were just, oh, just sing, you don't do this whole kind of thing, just sing. But I had finally got into this position where I was meeting different people in the theater world who were encouraging me and helping me and supporting me and making it possible, facilitating it, so that I could get this recognition from the Arts Council and from PRS and the funding support to get Cage Street Memorial to where it could be recorded and workshopped. And then I got a record deal with Freestyle Records, who also has on their label Omar and Courtney Pine, Jessica Lauren, and So it's quite a new age kind of scene for that kind of spin on sounds that are quite distinctive in their own right. Yeah. And then I was fortunate enough to have, through that, I met Orphy Robinson, who is this multi-instrumentalist. He's won a gazillion awards from his early days in his career, when he was the first UK signing to Blue Note back in the 90s, but he's had numerous awards since then. And he has his own project as well as working with loads of different people. And he came on board for Cade Street Memorial for the theater production aspect of it, which was, we did a sharing, a kind of preview at the Albany in 2015. And he brought on board Ronell Shaw, who, this young bassist who is also a spoken word artist and music producer as well. But he's most known probably for working with Rudimental, it's a pop band Rudimental, but Ronell works in theater and loads of different things. And Orphy also brought on board Sammy Bechet, this violinist, internationally renowned violinist with Egyptian roots as well as English roots. So this blend together, which is what I wanted a different sound. I wanted it different than the sound that people had come to expect, the rhythm sections that they were coming to know. And this is what I was able to compose. I was able to write music for the violin and write music specifically for, originally it was going to be for the accordion or for the French horn, and it turned out to be for the vibraphone. But the fact that I had these different instrumentations to tell the story along with me, to make the sounds be different, was what Cade Street Memorial was about, as well as the story of life itself. It tells the story of my grandfather being born in the late 1800s, and that over 100 years period in Mississippi, USA, during that time, which he was the first born in our family that was free of the slavery system. His mother had been an indentured servant, which was just an extension of slavery. And that meant her first 7 years was that she was a servant. How do you be a servant up until 7 years? But that was the circumstances of his time. And my son, who lives in 21st century Bristol, and that whole over 100 years from the southern part of the U.S. to Bristol, UK, 21st century, the different kind of music that goes on through there, the kind of politics that moves around and sometimes stays the same in some kind of way. That's the story behind it, but also the music that translates all of those different stories in different styles, because there's the UK music, which my son was 11 when we moved here. He's now 39. So he's more British than he is American because he spent more time here. And he's a musician as well as a chef. He became a chef because his mommy can't cook. She's learned how to cook a little bit more, but his sounds are ingrained in the British sounds. My sound, as much as I'm an American, but I was given a platform to do music through the British sound, and that British sound is what makes, for me, for my ear, is what expands it more, because I have more to listen to than just what it was that I grew up with. What I grew up with is plenty and mighty for sure. But to add on to this thing about the British music scene, which is the kind of thing where you can't actually teach it. You have to be in the midst of it to feel it. You can learn a Beatles song, but it's very, very different if you were actually in the midst of it. It's a very different thing and hard to explain unless you're in the midst of it. But I feel very, very fortunate to be in that, because all of these different influences that are coming into the music that I'm making is because I am here in the UK and I'm allowed to hear all of these different sounds and the blending of it. And now that I'm at this place, having had the recognition for Cade Street Memorial that I did, the Jazz FM nominated it for Jazz Innovation of 2018, just to be nominated alongside these young people, young and new people, was I'm an old girl, so to be nominated for an innovation award was Jazz Innovation of the Year award was quite cool, and it was encouraging for me to move forward. And that's why I consider myself as a futuristic artist, because I love the sounds that are now, the sounds that blend in with analog and what you've had before, but also sees the future in our sounds and how those instrumentations happen. But alongside seeing the future in our sounds, seeing the future in our minds, I look towards something to where we it can be a cliche to a lot of people where you go, okay, we get to a better place, but I have to believe that is the case. And I think with most artists, that is the thing that keeps them going, is that they have to believe that what it is that they do artistically is something that is going towards making the world better, if possible, making the world better in your contributions, more so than just pacifying people, more so than just keeping them calm or distracting them from the situations at hand. Giving them something, a purpose. For most of us, that's what it is. There's this recent Gibraltar Festival, Gibraltar World Music Festival, where people came from all over the world to this tiny little rock to promote this sense of harmony and how do we move forward in the midst of all of this chaos. Our world has always been chaotic, but music, theater, art, and now digital graphics, animation, and all of these things are ways in how we can tell ourselves what way can we go forward. And that's what I hope to do as a futuristic artist. Thank you for listening. You've been listening to Carleen Anderson.